New Buy, Sell, Keep, Avoid is back for Game Week 29. Welcome to FPL Mate, my name is Dan, and with the big blank game week ahead of us, there are a lot of big transfer decisions that we need to make, and hopefully this video can help you guys out just that little bit. Before we get started, make sure you do check out the latest episode of the Stick to FPL podcast that is out on all platforms right now. We talk about our ideal teams for Game Week 29, in which kind of players we would like to buy, looking in particular at Man City, Nottingham Forest and Wolves players. So I hope you're going to really enjoy that one. Check it out using the link in the description, or just search Stick to FPL on your favourite podcast platform. Today's Buy, Sell, Keep, Avoid video is going to work the same as always. The first part of the video, we will be having a look at those players you may already have in your team and which ones are the priority sells and which ones you should keep. After that, we'll be having a look at the best players to replace them with, which players you should buy and which players you should avoid. Players will be tier listed with the best picks at the top and the worst ones at the bottom. And we're going to kick things off right away with the forwards. And I know a lot of you are probably thinking, when it comes to keeping players and selling players, that maybe it's pretty obvious. Surely you just sell all of the players who don't have fixtures and keep all of the ones that do have fixtures. But I don't think it's quite as simple as that, and there's certainly some players that I would be more willing to sell than others, and others that might be worth holding on your bench for this game week in view of holding them on for future game weeks. So we're going to go through all of that first and foremost. We've got Wissa, Marmoush and Beto in the keep category for our forwards. I think all of these are fine to keep. Wissa in particular still putting up really good underlying numbers here, and Bournemouth kind of dropping down the table a little bit in terms of those defensive numbers. So I actually think this Bournemouth game is actually not too bad. Even Newcastle in game week 30, if you are looking to maybe wildcard in game week 31, I think Wissa is actually fine for these two fixtures. These are not two teams that are particularly impressive defensively, and both teams are conceding goals. And when we look at Brentford and the player most likely to score in each of these Brentford games, the answer is Yoane Wissa. Marmoush is a little bit of rotation risk, a little bit of minutes risk. However, in general, I think he is still worth keeping. It's more likely that he will play against Brighton than he will not play. So even though Marmoush is probably going to drop down our priority list for new forwards to buy, I think he's still well worth keeping ahead of these next two game weeks. Beto is also on here. He is still putting up some really nice underlying numbers, but his performances have dropped off a little bit. We're missing some key chances in the last two game weeks, but he is still getting those chances, which is certainly a positive to be taken here. Against West Ham at home, it's a decent enough fixture for the blank game week that he is going to be worth keeping. Joao Pedro is down in the monitor category. If you are in a luxury position, maybe you could sell Joao Pedro, but generally I think he is going to be a player to keep in your team. The difficulty with Joao Pedro is that it seems to be all about penalties at the moment, and for how much longer can we rely on penalties for Brighton, particularly against Manchester City, a game in which Brighton will not have too much of the ball. I'm not expecting any penalties in this particular game away from home. As we know, Man City are an improving defence as well. And after that, we've got Isak and Mateta, and I'll definitely say that out of the popular blanking forwards, Isak and Mateta are the two forwards I would be most willing to keep, and that is partially because a lot of you guys are going to have a lot of value, team value tied up in these players. If you sell them now, you're going to have to buy them back at an increased price compared to what you initially paid for them, and that's going to be a little bit difficult, dropping your team value down just that little bit. Also, both of these players have great game week 30s, decent game week 31s as well, and in game week 32, both of these players actually have double game weeks. So generally speaking, I would try and make an effort to keep Isak and Mateta unless it's absolutely essential that you do sell them for other purposes. Cunha is just about in the monitor category. He has a couple more games where he is going to be suspended, but he is going to be back for some nice fixtures in game week 31 and 32. So he may be worth keeping, but is way closer to being a sell than he is a keep. It's going to be about what other players, what other priorities you have. Because if you have Watkins, Gakpo and Nketiah, these are players I would sell no matter what. These have simply got to be removed from your team. Even for hits, you just got to get rid of them, because these are players that you're not only do you not want them in game week 29, but in all likeliness, you're not going to want them after game week 30 either. So they are going to be players that you are looking to sell right now, and possibly not getting them back until maybe a wild card, maybe possibly with Watkins, depending on what your strategy is with the double and blank game weeks. If Watkins has a double in 33, you might want him back for 32. You may want him even back for 33 itself. Maybe you're free hitting in game week 33, and that's when you'll get Watkins in. But in general, these are players that you don't need back immediately, and you're going to have less team value tied up in these guys as well, which makes a big difference between the likes of Isak and Mateta compared to Watkins and Gakpo. And Gakpo, honestly, in all likeliness, a lot of people are not going to own Gakpo again for the rest of the season, so you may as well just remove him. And Nketiah was also a punt a few people went for with Mateta out, but Mateta more than likely going to be back in game week 30 following his injury, and Nketiah is going to be back on the bench for Crystal Palace. So another player I would be more than happy, more than confident with just removing. No issues there. In the midfield category, yes, some people are actually selling Bryan Mbeumo after his blank against Aston Villa in game week 28, which surprised me, to be honest, that he even blanked in that game. I can't believe Aston Villa finally kept a clean sheet against the likes of Wissa and Mbeumo, who I still think are good picks in general. Mbeumo, penalty taker, we kind of mentioned that Bournemouth and Newcastle, actually not such bad fixtures. So particularly in a luxury situation, even if you have got plenty of transfers, not many players blanking this week, I'd still want to keep Mbeumo in my team. Similar situation for Kaoru Mitoma. He is obviously a player who has been in some good form, maybe started to drop off just a little bit, but Brighton are a top team at the moment, and you think in the next couple of game weeks he can still pick you up some points. Should be fairly nailed on as well in this Brighton side now that he is, back to full fitness, which is nice. And Mo Salah is the final player. Again, I would make an effort to keep, even though he blanks. And you guys are going to lose a lot of team value if you sell him. A lot of people pick Salah up for a far cheaper price tag, and therefore, if you sell Salah, you're going to have to pay an extra 0.5 million most likely in order to get him back, maybe even more depending on when you initially bought Salah for your team. Also, if you sell Salah, unless you wildcard in 30, and I would, if you are planning on wildcarding in 30, I would still try and leave myself open to wildcarding in 31, as we should have more information by game week 31 about the blanks and double game weeks coming up in the near future. You kind of want to have Salah for game week 30, right? So I would say that if possible, I would keep Salah, but I guess, there are scenarios if you feel like you absolutely have to sell Salah to get in the players that you want for game week 29, then maybe, but is the sacrifice worth it? In most cases, probably not. Now, Cole Palmer would be a player I would be far more willing to sell than Salah if you can make that happen. Arsenal away is obviously a tough fixture for any team, and Palmer out of form, out of sorts at the moment. You can see 2.95 XG for Palmer over the past 6 game weeks with 0 goals. That is absolutely tragic, but it's just not clicking for him at the moment. And as we've seen time and time again, the more difficult the fixture is for Palmer, the more difficult it is to get those FPL returns. He was previously known as like a flat track bully, but even that hasn't really happened recently. So the confidence in Palmer has dropped significantly, and I would be more than willing to sell him in order to fund other moves in your FPL team, because I would say it's pretty likely that Palmer does indeed blank. And considering how much he costs, what you can do with the Palmer money, I think he is probably worth selling more so than the guys in the keep category. But he is in the monitor mostly because I think there are some other higher priority sells, such as Dango, who is now rotation risk. And the reason he is not a full sell is because there is a chance between now and the game week 29 deadline that maybe there is an injury in the Bournemouth attack, which means that Dango will suddenly be a starter again for Bournemouth. But right now it looks like Dango is going to be on the bench, and we don't really want those 1-pointers. He is going to be worth replacing, maybe even for a hit. After that, we've got the likes of Sarr and Gordon, who are kind of players I would be okay with keeping if at all possible, but ideally you do sell these guys. I think they could still be useful after the blank game week. Whereas Rodgers, Luis Diaz, Rashford, no double game weeks in game week 32 for any of these guys. Possible double in 33 for the Aston Villa guys, but not for Liverpool. I would say that these players are far easier to just sell, remove from your team as a first priority if you do have them. For defenders, Gabriel and Robinson are going to be the players I would say I would keep for this week. week, I think Gabriel in particular, any Arsenal defender is great no matter what the fixture is, no matter who the opponent is. Arsenal are always going to have a good chance of a clean sheet. And they've kind of proven that. 3 clean sheets in 6. It's basically a clean sheet every other week. And if the pattern is to be recognised, that means a clean sheet this week. Just putting that one out there, guys. So Gabriel would be certainly a player I would keep alongside any other Arsenal defenders you have in your FPL team right now. Robinson is going to be a keep as well here, purely on the basis that I don't think it is worth spending a transfer on a nailed-on defender who actually does have a fixture in Game Week 29. If you know the player is going to have a fixture, probably not worth a transfer. Yes, there's a good chance Robinson picks up 2 points or maybe 1 point potentially, but he also has a chance of a clean sheet, a chance of attacking returns as he always does, being that that's just the thing he does. So I think it's generally not going to be worth a transfer to sell Robinson. There are going to be higher priorities of spending those transfers on the more attacking areas of your team. And that's why Robinson is going to be a keep for this game week. Although, hopefully, after this week, he can just go to your bench, maybe even be sold. Probably going to be wild-carded out as well, depending on how those blanks and double game weeks land. Munoz is going to be the final keep here. And generally speaking, most of you guys should have one defender on your bench this week. You know, one non-playing defender on your bench this week. And if it has to be anyone, it's got to be Munoz, I think. Out of all of the defenders in FPL right now, if I had to keep just one to hold onto my bench over a blank game week, I would choose Munoz because he is just such a fabulous pick. Super attacking, super creative, great fixtures from game week 30 onwards. You will want him back in your team immediately after game week 29, so there's absolutely no point in selling him. He's got to be a keep pretty much regardless of your situation, with maybe one small exception. And the exception is not Pedro Porro, although we will get to it in just one moment. But Pedro Porro, I think, is a slight rotation risk. I can see a world in which Spurs line up with a Doggy on the left and Spence on the right in that kind of defensive setup in the fullback positions against Fulham. I can see that as a possibility. So there is a small rotation risk there. But again, is Pedro Porro super high priority for a transfer this week? Probably not. Now, here are some other scenarios in which you might want to keep certain players. Alexander-Arnold, I can imagine some people might want to just hold him onto him on their bench instead of a player like Munoz. I mean, you could even do both potentially, but I think because of Trent's high price, by selling him as a kind of a cash cow player, you can really free up some money to make some really nice moves to get for game week 29. So I would be willing to sell Trent, but I would be more willing to sell the likes of Virgil and Konate for this week, as it's pretty clear that they offer a little bit less in terms of the attacking output that Trent obviously has right now. And as for the easy sells who blank this week, we've got Mark Gahey, Digne and Hall. All of these players, no fixture. Hall is going to be injured for the rest of the season. Mark Gahey, I just think he is probably not going to be the kind of Crystal Palace player you want to have in your squad. I think there's just many better options. You know, Munoz, who we already mentioned, Sarr, Eze, Mateta when he's back, which should be pretty soon, and even Henderson in goal, I would say are all better Crystal Palace players to own. So could be an opportunity to sell Mark Gahey and switch up your Crystal Palace assets when we come back after the blank game week. Digne, pretty obvious sell, I think. Just Aston Villa are not a team we trust defensively generally, and we mentioned Lewis Hall out for the season. Very, very straightforward sell if you can sell him. The only issue, I guess, with some of these cheaper defenders you see in the sell category is they don't really do too much for your budget. So you may actually find that you have to sell Trent rather than a Gahey, Digne, Hall, because you're trying to free up money to make other moves for your starting 11 for those attacking players. So it's going to be different for different people, but generally there are certain players I would make more effort to keep than others, despite the fact that they blank. And that goes across all of the positions, I would say. So I know some people think, you know, just sell your blanks, keep your players who do have fixtures. I don't think it is quite as simple as that. There are certain players like Dango who I would sell even though he technically has a fixture. And there are certainly some blanking players that I would love to keep on the bench for Game Week 29, ready to go straight back into my starting 11 in Game Week 30. And hopefully we've been able to kind of demonstrate that a little bit in the keeps and sells categories. But the more exciting part of the video is, of course, going to be the buys, and we have plenty of buys for you this week. And before we have a look at them, guys, if you wouldn't mind liking the video, that would really help me out so much. Massive shout out to all of you guys who like every video. You really do make a huge difference to the ability of this channel to keep going, essentially. So yeah, please do that. And of course, subscribe if you like these videos and you want to see more tips for the rest of the season, particularly with the blanks and doubles coming up. We're going to help you out a whole bunch. So forwards to buy, and yeah, the number one player for me is going to be Erling Haaland. He is going to be the priority buy for this week. And I think, in fairness, it's pretty similar at the top of this list for forwards to buy as it was last game week. I think Haaland, yes, Brighton is probably not the perfect fixture right now, but still, Erling Haaland is Erling Haaland. Man City are looking a little bit better at the moment, and I do think they are going to definitely have some opportunity to get some goals in this game. And we know Brighton, yes, they're playing well, but they're just a team that are always a moment away from a complete capitulation, like that 7-0 loss against Nottingham Forest that you guys might remember. So if you're looking for a captain option for this week, I think Haaland and Wood are two of the main kind of competitors for that captain option. There's one more player that we are going to talk about for captaincy this week as well, but Haaland and Wood are the two main guys. Both of these players putting up decent underlying numbers, both have good enough fixtures. I think Haaland in particular is useful if you need a player for the next 2 game weeks, because you do of course have Haaland, Leicester at home in Game Week 30, which is a real nice captain opportunity there as well. So even though Haaland is super expensive, bringing him in for 2 game weeks, having that captain option for both weeks is going to be super handy. And also, if you're wildcarding soon anyway, maybe you're wildcarding in 30, 31, it's not like it's a long-term thing. You can free up that Haaland budget immediately on your wild card if things don't go to plan, if you're not keen on keeping Haaland longer term. That's totally fine. Chris Wood, we don't need to speak about too much because he has just been one of the best FPL assets of the entire season. Though it has to be said, he has been lacking in kind of attacking, shooting, goal scoring prowess over the last few game weeks. I wonder if that can change in some nice fixtures against Ipswich and Manchester United. However, and he'll get back to his usual stuff. Of course, Haaland and Wood, both penalty takers as well, which is ultra handy when you are looking to find points in a more difficult game week, a game week we expect to be low scoring. Sometimes you do need to cheese some points in game weeks like that, and there's no better way to get cheesy points than those beautiful penalties. And Evan Nilsson is going to be the third player here. Really like his fixtures. We kind of mentioned him last week as a player that if you are willing to take a bet on him starting in Game Week 28, then he is probably my favourite of the cheap forwards. That has not changed. In fact, now that he has started at the weekend, I have even more confidence that Evan Nilsson is a really nice pick, and he would actually be my third favourite forward to own in Game Week 29. So maybe if you can't afford Haaland, or maybe you can't afford both Haaland and Wood, you want to try and find a slightly cheaper guy to help with manage your budget a little bit, Evan Nilsson is going to be a really nice pick for you as well. Beto is going to be a monitor, ultra short-term kind of pick here, because you're not going to want to play him in Game Week 30 really away against Liverpool. But West Ham at home is not such a bad fixture. But considering we already spoke about Beto, let's have a look at some of these other guys. Wissa is going to be on this list as well. A little bit more expensive than Beto, but if you want to go for someone around this price tag, no problem with buying him as well. Although he's not like my favorite of these players. I think certainly Haaland, Wood, Evan Nilsson would be my favorites, but I'd say Wissa and Beto, kind of the category just below that. After that, these are players I am far less keen on. Marmoush, with that slight minutes risk, even if he does start, you're looking at 70 minutes from him. Is that good enough? I'm not sure it is. Is Brighton at home a good enough fixture to justify going for a slight rotation risk player? No penalties. Maybe. So kind of leave that with you. Again, these are players I certainly wouldn't be looking to sell by any stretch of the imagination. But if you have an option to buy a new forward, don't know if I would go there. There's maybe players I think we would slightly prefer. And Raul Jimenez, again, similar situation. If you have him, great, play him. But if you're looking for a new forward at this kind of price tag, I would be looking at Evan Nilsson and Beto before looking at Raul Jimenez. Which brings us to these other guys. João Pedro, don't think it's the week for him. We mentioned about him scoring a lot of penalties and how it's unlikely that a penalty will come in a game in which Brighton will see much lower possession against Manchester City. So, yeah, if you have João Pedro, no problem with playing him, no problem with keeping him, but he's not really going to be a player to pick up this game week necessarily. Xerxes, just my constant distrust of Manchester United means that Xerxes is going to be in the avoid category. When was the last time we saw Xerxes get a return in the Premier League? It's been quite some time. So, yeah, super speculative Xerxes. Wouldn't be looking to go there. And Strand Larsen, a man who's only taken, I believe, 2 shots in 6 game weeks. Granted, he's only started 2 games during that period, but still, it's not very good. I just think this Wolves attack without Cunha is going to struggle. We're kind of already seeing the start of that. So despite a great fixture, you do need a player at least who is, getting opportunities to score, even in these easier fixtures. If a player isn't shooting, if a player isn't getting on the end of the opportunities as part of the team and how they're playing, then it's really not too much use. So therefore, Strand Larsen is unfortunately going to be in the avoid category. Again, at the price tag of the likes of João Pedro, Strand Larsen, I'd be looking at Evan Nilsson, I'd be looking at Wood. Beto, I guess. Wood a little bit more expensive. But yeah, those are the kind of guys I prefer if you're looking for cheap. Very cheap indeed. Midfielders is super interesting this week, but we are going to put Bruno Fernandes as the number 1 buy for this week. And the reason for that is because I think he's actually a pretty good captain option as well. I would say Haaland, Wood and Fernandes are probably our big 3 captains for Game Week 29. So if you can add him to your squad, it could be really useful. Now, Bruno is particularly useful for those maybe on a free hit this week or people who are dead set on wildcarding in Game Week 30. Because obviously, the Game Week 29 fixture is much better than the Game Week 30 fixture against Forest. But Leicester provides an excellent opportunity for a man in form, perhaps the only man in form at Manchester United. Set piece extraordinaire, penalty taker. Really everything that Manchester United are doing right now is going through Bruno. So despite Man United generally being quite poor, if we're picking individual players, and that is the game of FPL, then Bruno's really not putting a foot wrong. So I would definitely be open to buying him. I would say he would be one of the best buys to buy this game week if you can afford him. But if you're looking for something a little bit cheaper, maybe Cliver could be the answer to that. I know a lot of people have Cliver already and Burmo as well, but these are 2 players that have been in pretty good form alongside Bruno. All 3 of these guys, good form, getting FPL returns, have that confidence. Fixtures are good enough as well, certainly for Bruno, but again, Bournemouth versus Brentford, there could be goals in that game, and I would have no problem picking up these 3 penalty-taking midfield maestros. From midfield penalty-taking maestros to monitors in the midfield, and certainly at this point, we need to start having a look at those Nottingham Forest midfielders, and I've got Gibbs White as probably the number 1 Forest midfielder to buy right now, putting up really good numbers, taking up a lot of shots. 14 shots in 6 game weeks is certainly significant. 10 key passes as well, and even though he is overperforming his numbers, 5 assists from 0.55 expected assists is an enormous overperformance. But what we're seeing is high volumes of shots and key passes, which is certainly a good thing, and any shot you take, any key pass you make always has a chance of ending up in a goal. And certainly the positions that Gibbs White is occupying right now, I like the look of it. I think if you can afford a slightly more expensive 6.5 million Nottingham Forest midfielder, then he's certainly a player I would look at ahead of the fixtures of against Ipswich and Manchester United at home after that. But Callum Hudson-Odoi is super high for me as well, outside of those kind of, expensive, more template midfielders in Fernandes, Cliver and Burmo. And Hudson-Odoi is probably my favourite differential this week. And actually, if you've already watched the Stick to FPL podcast, we spoke a lot about Hudson-Odoi there and how he could be such a great differential. But really, Hudson-Odoi, his numbers look slightly worse, but it should be said that he's only actually started 3 games in the past 6 game weeks because he's been returning from injury over the past few weeks. He was out for a few games there, and as such, what we actually see is that this here is a player who has scored 3 goals in his last 4 appearances for Forest. He also looks far more direct and shooting far more often than Elanga, who is a similar price, who we will also be speaking about in this video. But certainly Hudson-Odoi is the man in form, the man in confidence. He is taking on shots that you wouldn't always expect to go in, and yet they do. It's kind of similar in a way to Cliver, a player who doesn't necessarily have great underlying numbers, but because they are in good form, playing with good confidence, they are getting the results. And this is very much a case of watching football over just looking at the stats. And I think certainly when we're looking for someone for the short term, and really we're looking game week 29, 30, then we're going to be wildcarding, you know, we need a short term pick. We need a player who is in great form right now. We don't have time to wait for things to balance out on those underlying numbers. We need that informed player. And Hudson-Odoi is certainly that guy right now. And having watched the highlights, having watched the last few games of Forest, kind of really deeping who is the best Forest midfielder to go for, I think at over 1 million cheaper than Gibbs White, Hudson-Odoi is a serious contender. Savinho is here, has been starting games, but you're always a little bit worried about rotation with Pep Guardiola. But Savinho is also a player putting up really, really nice underlying numbers. You can see here, 5 games played in 6 game weeks, 13 shots, 2 big chances, 1.26 XG, and a decent amount of creativity there as well. I would certainly consider Savinho for this game week if you are looking for a midfielder, particularly for the next 2 weeks. If you're looking for someone for Brighton and Leicester, game week 29 and 30, I think Savinho could be interesting. And Bowen, unfortunately, is going to have to drop down here a little bit. Things are just not clicking in the West Ham attack at the moment. And Everton are a team that typically don't concede too many chances per game, particularly in recent game weeks. They don't concede too many chances. So away from home, I think this is actually maybe a tough one for Bowen, and you could still try Bowen out if you do have the money, but value for money, I think there are maybe better options. He is a consideration, but that's about it. And on to the avoids, we're going to put Elanga in here, which is super interesting because he is a kind of player who I know is going to be popular among the kind of data guys, but yeah, I think his data is maybe a little bit misleading, and that's because when we look at his XG, pretty much all of his XG was from a huge chance that he missed against Newcastle a few weeks ago, and pretty much all of his expected assists was all generated in that 7-0 game against Brighton. Outside of that, not really been providing much, not really shooting much, not really creating too much. It's just those 2 games in the last 6 game weeks that have accounted for so much of his data. So perhaps a little bit misleading. Also, it just looks like when you watch Forest right now, the Gibbs White and Hudson-Odoi are the guys in form and not Elanga. Elanga we're seeing getting substituted earlier as well than these guys. So all of my thoughts are saying, actually, I know the data looks good for Elanga on paper, but actually, I think Gibbs White and Hudson-Odoi are going to be better picks this week. And that is the only reason I'm putting Elanga in a void. It's not because he's a bad pick as on an individual basis, but if you're picking a Nottingham Forest midfielder for this week, I don't think Elanga would be the guy to go for. And finally on here, we've got Heung-min Son, not even starting the last couple of games. He did score that penalty, but in general, at 9.7 million, I can't see where the value is there, unless maybe you're on a free hit and you just have loads of money to spend and don't really know where to spend it. Maybe you could go for Son. But as a general transfer, I don't think I'll be looking there. And Phil Foden as well, even at his price tag, we are seeing so many other players putting up so much better numbers, better performances, and perhaps more nailed on for Foden. So I genuinely think, despite the price tags of Son and Foden, they look like they should be really, really good performers. But we're seeing so many cheaper players doing better than these guys. Even if Son and Foden were 7 million, 6 million, I still think I would prefer to go for the likes of Bruno, Cliver, and Burmo, Gibbs White, Hudson-Odoi, even if, you know, price and money was not a factor at all. So let's move on to the defenders next. Gabriel will top this list. We've already spoken about him. Let's go over the Forest defenders here, because Milenkovic is here in the 2nd position for a buy. And actually, even though Forest's defensive data over the past 10 game weeks has not been great, actually over the last 2 games, games against Man City and Arsenal, they've actually put up really good defensive performances in these games. And when we're looking at Forest defenders, I think Milenkovic would be one of the players I'll be looking to go for, because Milenkovic always looks like maybe the guy most likely to score for Forest. Probably the best chance of attacking returns from those set pieces in particular. He's not great for bonus points, which puts me off him a little bit. But if you're looking for a Forest defender, maybe even a bit cheaper, then Murillo is always good for bonus points, but doesn't really have much XG or XA. Nico Williams also pretty good for bonus points and a little bit of creativity there as well. But in general, Milenkovic, Murillo, Nico Williams, none of these Forest defenders really put up very much in terms of attacking numbers, so it's difficult to pick out which one to go for. Maybe you just go for the cheapest guy, which is Nico Williams at 4.4 million, but Murillo, he really does look likely to get a bonus point or two every time Forest keep a clean sheet, so that is definitely something to consider. All three of those defenders from Forest I just mentioned, I would be more than happy to buy this week for my FPL team. They each have something they're good at. Milenkovic for perhaps the goals, Williams for a little bit of creativity and obviously a little bit of bonus, and Murillo, no attacking threat really, but a pure bonus point magnet, which is really nice. And we've also got Aït-Nouri in the buy section here as well. Really nice fixtures. Wolves are an improving defense, which is nice to see. Not too much in the ways of attacking potential here for Aït-Nouri these days, but Southampton away, West Ham at home are really nice fixtures if you're looking for clean sheets. Gvardiol is certainly an option, but I expect Brighton to score against Man City this game week, so I don't think he is a must buy, but maybe more of a player you might consider buying if you're looking for someone for the next 2 game weeks in 29 and 30 against Leicester as well. Agbadou here is my favourite of the ultra cheap defenders. If you're looking for ultra budget, you're desperately trying to find money to spend elsewhere in your team as part of, you know, double, triple, quadruple transfers, then Agbadou is certainly the cheap defender to go for. Nailed on Wolves defender with nice fixtures, so definitely someone to consider there. Mykolenko, Everton's still a pretty good defence. Mykolenko is 4.4 million, pretty cheap, but if you are spending 4.4 million on a defender, I would perhaps prefer to go for Nico Williams, or maybe just go all the way down to Agbadou at 4 million. Kirkes at 5.1, little bit too expensive for me. Not a player I'll be looking to buy, but certainly a player, if you have him already, I would be more than happy to play him against Brentford, though I'm not sure if I expect a clean sheet in this game. You would be counting on an assist, and even though he has got 2 assists, he's maybe been a little bit fortunate. One of the assists was a fabulous cross. The other assist was a pretty standard pass in the game, and Cliver just produced a moment of magic. So I'm not sure if that can be replicated super easily. Play him if you have him. As the same with any player on this list, really. You play them if you have them. You don't even think about selling them. But I don't know if he would be my number 1 priority to buy this week. I certainly prefer the other defenders mentioned so far. Which brings us to Aina, and yes, I am going to be an Aina hater once again. I'm so sorry, Ola Aina. It's not even his fault. It's just the fact that he has climbed up to 5.3 million. That it's just too expensive for what he offers. I know people just assume because Aina has scored the most points this season that he must be the best Forest defender, but in the last 6, 7, or even 10 game weeks, that has just not been the case. Whilst we mentioned that Milenkovic is best for XG, Williams is best for XA, and Murillo is best for bonus points, Aina really isn't the best for any of those things. He's taken 1 shot in the past 10 game weeks. I think he's only made 4 key passes in 10 game weeks as well. So super, super low, even by Forest defender standards, super, super low attacking threat there. And unless he gets an attacking return, he's not going to get bonus points, and it doesn't look like he is getting an attacking return either. So he's not really the best at anything when you look at the 4 defenders from Forest, and considering he's also the most expensive, it just makes absolute no sense to buy him this week. That said, and this is why we try and divide this up into sections of these are the players to consider buying, and the other section was about selling players. I know people will always make this mistake. Whenever I say, yeah, I don't think I would buy Aina, I think I prefer to buy one of the other Forest defenders, people always say, well, no, I think Aina's great. And these people are always people who already have Aina in their team. That is fine. If you have Aina in your team, he is great. he is amazing. He is a 100% keep player. But for those looking for a new defender, I see literally no benefit in getting Aina rather than the other Forest defenders, outside of maybe just because everyone else owns Aina, but they're all going to get clean sheet points together. Aina is the least likely to get an attacking return, one of the least likely to get bonus points. Actually, Milenkovic is slightly worse for bonus points than Aina, it should be said. So, I don't see it. As a buy, I don't see it. As a player, if you already have him, amazing. Genuinely amazing. But as a new player to buy, why pick him? Why him over the other guys? I don't see it. But anyway, Wan-Bissaka is also going to go in the avoid section. Everton away, not super convinced by this one. Not super convinced by West Ham as a defence. Generally, they are mid-table defensively at best, but probably that's even generous. And Kukurea away against Arsenal is not a player I'd be looking to pick up. He has been relying on those goals to become such a mega scorer recently, and I can't see that happening. Can't really see the clean sheet happening either. So he's in the avoid. And a quick whiz through goalkeepers, because this video is already crazily long. There's just been so much to speak about. But Pickford, yeah, definitely a keep for this week. Some people are selling Pickford for some reason. I know he has been blanking recently, but I think Everton generally have been, alongside Fulham, really unlucky not to get more clean sheets in recent game weeks, because they look good defensively. It just seems like these odd random goals are going in, but it's usually not sustainable. I think Pickford is fine to keep. Henderson, I would also make an effort to keep. Just bench him for this week, or maybe make a transfer on your other goalkeeper, or maybe just play without a goalkeeper for game week 29. I don't think that's the end of the world, if I'm totally honest, to play with 10 men if one of the, you know, if the player who you're not playing is a goalkeeper or a defender. I don't think there's too much issue there. We've got Martinez and Alisson as players to sell, because I can't really see people buying these guys back in, probably for the rest of the season now, so just get rid. And as for these players to buy, Sells and Jose Sa, exactly the same two goalkeepers as we said last game week for buys. These two cheap defenses to pick from have good chances of clean sheets over the coming game weeks. Avoid Edison, despite his attacking returns recently, which has been quite crazy. And Flecken has an awful run of fixtures. Would not be looking to pick him up either. But I know we covered an insane amount of players in this video, but I'm sure there are other players I didn't mention that you guys would like to talk about. Let me know in the comment section if there is any players we missed today, and I'll let you know if there are a buy, a sell, keep, or an avoid. Of course, if you have any other FPL questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them, or maybe even some non-FPL questions. I'll answer them as well. Why not? Why not at this point? But if you enjoyed this one, make sure you drop a like. Do subscribe if you're new around here. Check out the Stick to FPL podcast if you haven't done already, and I will see you tomorrow for the 100 Experts video. How are they going to be navigating Game Week 29? We will find out very soon. See you later, mates. Bye-bye.